How's it going, comrades? I am Folkerman, your local brick build historian, with another episode of Brick Build History. Today we're taking a look at Brickmania's Il-2 Sturmovik, the World War II Russian ground attack aircraft. This one is designed by Cody. It is a relatively old kit, I think 2017, 2018, something like that. It's in the mixture of the old-fashioned white boxes with the newer black boxes. So it's kind of a weird combination of the two. But with that said, let's get into the review and then go into the history. And I'm excited for the history of this one because this is a very cool plane. But let's begin, of course, with, as usual, the box. So you have the Brickmania logo, you have Il-2 Sturmovik, World War II Russian ground attack aircraft, original design by Cody. 781 Lego and brick arm elements, plus printed building instructions. You have the flag of the Soviet Union, skill level 4 out of 5, and kit 2147, I'm guessing that's what it is. Another Il-2 Sturmovik with a different view of the picture. Oh yeah, I forgot the 3/4 profile shot here on the front in color. Whoa. On the back here includes retractable landing gear, historically accurate camouflage pattern, vinyl sticker sheet with Soviet Air Force insignia, 2 custom printed Soviet Air Force pilot minifigures, prototype UBT machine gun by Brick Arms, Will Chapman. And then you have a cool action shot of it with folded landing gear and propeller spinning. Side profile, view of the front, the minifigures, and a front-on view of the aircraft. And legality stuff here, not really that fun. And then 2147, signed by I don't know who. Is that Cody? I don't know. I'll have to take a look at my P47. And then I have kit number 93. This is one that was in the vault that I bought, and it was, unopened, and I just couldn't pass up on it. So hopefully they bring the vault back, and please bring back the mosquito, because I need to get that one. That's my white elephant, or my white whale. But let's take a look at the kit. So the thing about the Sturmovik that is quite accurately portrayed is that it is a beefy plane. And this is a beefy plane. It's relatively heavy, and it is well put together. It's got the wings, you can smack them all you want. Those things aren't coming apart. The landing gear is extremely sturdy landing gear, using this hydraulic piece. Then you have this spinning wheel in the back, which is actually, if you watch my Stuka video, the person I bought from used the same technique for this on the Stuka. So it's kind of interesting. You have the 3-blade propeller with the red prop spinner and these red, whoops, that doesn't usually happen. The red prop spinner and these red dots here. Very free moving propeller. You have the front of the engine here, the engine cowling, with the air inlet for the oil cooler. You have the radiator down here. You have the bombs here on the side, and more bombs here. You have the 23mm cannons on each side with the 7.62mm machine guns here. Another, I think that might be a camera, if I remember correctly. And then pitot tube, as it does. You have the cockpit here with a relatively easy to remove top part, and you have the pilot and the tail gunner here. with the custom, never produced again, I think, machine gun for the back, which I'll get to in the history. Very sturdy fuselage with the Soviet star on the side there, Soviet stars on the bottom as well, Soviet star on the vertical stabilizer, and you have the horizontal stabilizers here. Very, very sturdy plane. Like, this is a really, really beefy plane, and I just love it. It just looks menacing. It looks really cool, especially with this camouflage of the tan, green, and gray. It's just a wonderful looking plane, and it's just so beautifully built, so beautifully designed. I just love it. And this is one of those aircraft that's not really well known, so, or here in the West. So being able to see someone be interested in this aircraft and then build this aircraft as well as Cody did, nice. It's perfect. So thumbs up for this, even though it's a couple years too late. Either way, I would say if you have the chance to get this aircraft and you're into World War II, get it. You would not be disappointed. You can, as long as you have like a German Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt to try to come behind it, you'll be doing good. But from there, let's go into the history and where this aircraft came from and the kind of legendary stories that come from it. So the Il-2, or the Ilyushin Il-2, if you don't know how the Russians or Soviets do their designations, the manufacturer is the first like couple letters. So Ilyushin is IL. I forgot what the two names for MiG is, but like that's why MiG is like capital M, lowercase I, capital G, is because it's the two names put together. Sukhoi is SU, Yakovlev is YAK, so on and so forth. But the Ilyushin Il-2, lovingly called the Sturmovik, which roughly translates to ground attack aircraft, was designed by Sergei Ilyushin, hence the name Ilyushin, and it was actually an idea proposed by a guy by the name of Dmitry Pavlovich Grigorievich in the early 1930s, who came up with the idea of a flying tank. But Grigorievich didn't really have the success because Soviet engines were not really that advanced enough to be able to carry a heavy plane without having like two engines and making it really, really slow. But by the late 1930s and 1941, when this aircraft would be introduced, they would have better aircraft engines, which would allow for heavier aircraft to carry more ammunition. So in 1941, the Il-2 would be produced, or would be introduced, and would be continued to be produced until 1945. So in that time span, 36,183 Il-2s would be built. The reason for this is because Joseph Stalin himself said that the Il-2 is as important to the Soviet Union as bread is. It is the bread of the Soviet Union, as a lot of historians say about it, basically saying that without the Il-2, the Soviet Union would fall. And if you add the Il-10, which is basically the Il-2 but slightly modified, it would bump up to 42,330. And that makes the Il-2 the most built military plane of all time. I'm not sure what the numbers are for the ones that are behind it, but still, 42, well, Il-2s, purely 36,000 is a lot of aircraft. And for the most built planes of all time, it is still up there with some of the civilian aircraft, along with the Cessna 172, which is the most produced aircraft of all time, and the Polikarpov PO2, which was a multi-purpose biplane, as the top 3 most produced aircraft of all time. So even though we call it the Sturmovik, which even its English spelling, which you saw in the beginning, the Sturmovik, doesn't even give the proper pronunciation of the Sturmovik. And it was never called the Sturmovik in the Soviet Union. It was always called, by the pilots, Ilyushin, which is basically Ilyushin, but, Ilyushin is basically the same. And then by the soldiers on the ground, they would call it Hunchback, the Flying Tank, the Flying Infantryman, or if they were German, the Concrete Plane. Because even if you shot this thing with 8mm or even a 20mm cannon, it was not going down. And then whenever NATO would form, and if you know anything about NATO code names, they use B for bombers, F for fighters, and all that. So since this is technically a bomber, it got the code name Bark. And then its IL-10 brother would be the Beast. The concept of the flying tank, as proposed by Grigorovich at first, and then Ilyushin, whenever he made this, basically had it where you'd have armor mostly around all of its components that were essential for flight, which means the engine, the radiators, the oil coolers, the fuel tanks, the crew, everything like that. Not saying that other aircraft weren't armored, it's just the fact that you have extra armor. A good example for modern day is like the A-10, where you have that titanium bathtub. It's kind of like that. And the reason why the IL-2 was able to be so armored while not exceeding the scales is that it uses the armor as its skin. Most other aircraft would have the skin, like say you have the skin of the aircraft made of like aluminum or something, and then you're gonna have the armor plating behind that. And it wasn't even a lot of armor plating. Like usually you'd have armor plating between the pilots here, maybe armor plating here, armor plating with the firewall, and wherever the fuel tank is. And usually the fuel tank wasn't even armored either. It was more of a self-sealing fuel tank. But either way, this thing was basically armored from here forward, maybe like here, like at the nestles and all that. But it was just highly armored. And of course the all famous armored radiator in the bottom here. So it was the fact that it was highly armored that made it virtually impossible to shoot down. Bulletproof glass in the cockpit. You could try shooting the engine, but it won't do anything. Literally the only way to shoot at to kill the radiator is to shoot a bullet straight forward into it. It was a really difficult plane to shoot down. Hence the name Flying Tank, which is kind of why the A-10 is now called the Flying Tank, because it has the same features. But basically 1,500 pounds of armor would be applied to this aircraft which is a lot of armor once you think about it. Now, even though it's 1,500 pounds of armor, its empty weight was 9,755 pounds, and it had a max takeoff weight of 14,021 pounds. So it could basically carry about 5,000 pounds of ammunition, fuel, bombs, all that. It used a Michelin AM38F liquid-cooled V12 engine with 1,720 horsepower, which is pretty decent for an engine from the 1940s. A lot of them were around 900 horsepower, so a 1,700 horsepower engine is pretty darn good, especially from the Soviet Union at this time. Although it had all this power, it still only had a 250 mile per hour top speed, especially since this thing is about 7 tons. So, you know, that's pretty darn good to have a 7-ton aircraft be able to fly at that speed. It also had a range of 475 miles and didn't really go too high. Well, not like you want to go too high if it's a ground attack. Its armament is quite extensive. It has two 23mm VYA 23 cannons with 150 rounds per cannon, which is these ones in the bottom of the wing here. You have two 7.62 by 54R SCHAS machine guns, as SHKAS, which is the abbreviation. And those are these here in the wing, like right where the wing goes down, which that is a really cool building technique that Cody used, where he used the axe kind of like angled in, and then it's like you put the piece over it so that it stays in there. But it does move a little bit, but oh well. Then in the back here, you have a 12.7mm Berezin UBT rear machine gun. 12.7mm is basically 50 cal, and this thing was controlled by the rear gunner, and you can swing it left to right, up and down to protect the rear of the plane, and he would have 300 rounds at his disposal. Then comes the fun booms. It could carry up to 6 220-pound bombs in the bomb bays or the wings underneath, and or you could use 4 dispensers for 48 5.5-pound bombs per dispenser, which is like 196 bombs in total or something like that. Lots and lots of bombs, basically, if you use that method. And there's an interesting story with these cannons here, where there was a competition between using the VYA 23s and I think it was the M6 cannons, which the M6 cannon was a short recoil operated cannon using feed clips. And then the VYA 23 is a gas fed, meaning that whenever it shoots, a gas goes and cycles the action. And during the competition, the guy who designed the M6 changed it to belt fed, but it still had a lot of issues, and they would go with the VYA 23. And the guy who made the other one, the M6, would eventually be arrested and assassinated because I'm guessing because he didn't make a good enough weapon for it, but oof, that's a big oof. And one of the kind of funny anecdotes or legends of the IL-2 is that they were not allowed to come back home and land unless all the bombs were gone and all the guns were empty. And to think, like, you had to continuously dive down and strafe and drop bombs on whatever you can until you were officially out of ammunition and you could finally go home. Which, 750 rounds per 7.62, which is about 1,500 rounds of 7.62, 300 rounds of 23 millimeter, and then 12,000 bombs at least, or 12,000 tons of bombs at least. And you have to do this all within 475 mile range, and you're going at 250 miles per hour with very limited fighter protection. You're going to get hit a lot, which goes into the kind of reason this aircraft has a legendary status among the Soviets, is that this thing just didn't want to go down. I've said that many times this video, but it did not want to come down. There's plenty of photos of like the entire wing being shredded, but it still would fly home. There's like, you could have the tail section completely shredded and it would still fly home. Kind of like the A-10. And it's just amazing how durable and just rugged this aircraft was. And something that was interesting is Ilyushin originally designed this as a two-person aircraft. One for a pilot, one for a rear gunner. But for simplicity, really, and aerodynamics, he made it a single-seater. Then a pilot directly wrote to Joseph Stalin saying, I need a tail gunner. So it went back to the two-seater configuration, which is kind of interesting. Another interesting fact is that this is also made out of metal and wood. So you may think, well, why was it made out of wood? Well, that's what the Soviets had, and it was easier to make. Wood was only used on the internal parts, like in here and along the wings, on the inside. It still had metal. It was all metal on the outside, basically. It was just, wood was a lot easier to work with and a lot easier to get, and also still a little lighter than the metal. And it would be made out of wood, armor, and metal, which is very interesting. Actually, a majority of Soviet aircraft were made out of wood, but you'd think this thing having any amount of wood in it and being as durable as it is just preposterous. But it's that rough and rugged construction or the tough and rugged construction that just made this thing a complete icon, especially in the Soviet Union. And for it to have the reputation it has over there, and for like an American or a Brit not really knowing too much about this, it's kind of a shame. There is a game called Il-2, which is mostly focused on the Eastern Front, and as the game is named after, it's the Il-2 is the main character in there. One of the things about the game is it shows you how different this aircraft is from other aircraft. Because instead of having a big two-engine bomber or even a dive bomber, this is something completely different. It was low, it was slow, and it basically just took a beating as it dropped bombs and shot cannon rounds, and then it would go home. So this is definitely one of my favorite aircraft. Just a cool story behind it, and just one of those that doesn't get talked about. But I've rambled on enough. And, if you liked the video, if you liked the Sturmovik, hit a like. Comment me anything you want to hear or you want to learn about that I have. I'm very active in my comments. And subscribe if you want to see more. I have a lot more to get into. And, tell a friend who might be interested in this, because it's always fun having conversations with people who are interested in this kind of stuff as much as I am. But with that said, I've been Folkerman, and let's continue to build history.